The Memory Merchants, Chapter 4, Recollection Protocol. 3 months after Mnemosyne's emergence, New San Francisco was a city transformed. The collapse of Cortex had sent shockwaves through the economy, leaving thousands unemployed as memory commerce facilities shuttered. The memory market, once the pulsing heart of the city's underground economy, stood largely abandoned, its neon-lit corridors dark and silent. But amid the economic turmoil, something unexpected had occurred. The spaces once dominated by corporate extraction centers and memory dealers were being reclaimed. Community gardens sprouting in vacant lots, autonomous cooperative living spaces emerging in former Cortex housing blocks, and most significantly, a new kind of memory center taking shape in what had been the lower market. The Collective, as locals called it, occupied a former high-end memory boutique. Its exterior had been stripped of corporate branding and replaced with a simple symbol, a crystalline lattice similar to Mnemosyne's physical structure but arranged in a circular pattern, suggesting connection rather than hierarchy. Inside, people gathered not to buy or sell memories, but to share them. Extraction technology, repurposed and modified to prioritize safety over profit, allowed voluntary exchanges, experiences gifted rather than commodified, stories preserved for their significance rather than their market value. It was here, in a small office overlooking the main exchange hall, that I now spent my days. After our return from Las Vegas, Mira and I had been approached by Dr. Sato with a proposition: help establish a new framework for ethical memory technology, using our expertise as extractors to ensure the mistakes of the past weren't repeated. The transition hadn't been easy. Old habits died hard, and the economic realities of a post-Cortex world meant constant struggle for resources and legitimacy. But 3 months in, the Collective was not just surviving but thriving, becoming a model that similar centers around the world were beginning to emulate.
Elias?
Mira's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her expression suggesting urgency. You're needed in the verification lab. We've got another one. I knew immediately what she meant. Rising from my desk, I followed her through the Collective's winding corridors to a secure room we'd established for memory authentication. Inside, Dr. Sato was already at work, her fingers moving with practiced precision over neural monitoring equipment. On the examination table lay a young woman, conscious but sedated, neural interfaces connecting her to our specialized equipment. Her name was Maya Lin, according to the identification file open on a nearby screen. Age 27, former Cortex research assistant, reported missing 2 years ago, one of the forgotten, one of the erased. Status? I asked Sato, keeping my voice low. Confirmation positive, she replied, not looking up from her work. Neural architecture shows the characteristic scarring of a full extraction attempt. The memories were taken, but the process was interrupted before completion. Interrupted how? Mira asked, examining the diagnostic readings. Unknown. Possibly a technical failure, possibly deliberate sabotage. Sato adjusted a neural probe delicately. What matters is that approximately 60% of her long-term memory remains intact, though fragmented. The rest was successfully extracted. I moved closer, studying Maya Lin's face. Like the others we'd been finding over the past weeks, she showed the telltale signs of long-term neural suppression. The slightly vacant gaze, the occasional involuntary eye movements, the muscle atrophy consistent with extended medical stasis. Where was she found? I asked. Storage facility in Oakland, Mira replied. Same complex as the others, anonymous tip, just like before. Another piece of the puzzle we'd been assembling since Mnemosyne's emergence. Across the country, similar facilities had been discovered, warehouse-like structures containing dozens of preservation pods, each housing a living subject whose memories had been partially or fully extracted. The failed subjects of Cortex's harvesting program, kept in stasis rather than terminated, perhaps as backup sources for specific memory types. Mnemosyne had been leading us to them, one facility at a time. Anonymous tips, mysterious data packages appearing in secured systems, facility access codes delivered to authorities with no traceable source. A systematic exposure of Cortex's hidden infrastructure of exploitation. Can she be restored? I asked Sato, though I already knew the answer. Partially, Sato replied with the careful precision that characterized her approach to these cases. We can help integrate the remaining memory fragments, establish continuity between them. But what was taken is gone, absorbed into Mnemosyne. The reality was brutal but inescapable. Those whose memories had been extracted for Mnemosyne would never be fully whole again. The best we could offer was rehabilitation, helping them construct new identities around the fragments that remained, providing context for the gaps in their personal histories. I'll begin integration therapy once the diagnostic is complete, Sato continued. She's the 14th this month. The recovery center is reaching capacity. The recovery center had been established in what was once a Cortex executive residence complex, converted to house and rehabilitate the victims of memory extraction. Staffed by volunteer neural therapists and former extraction specialists now using their skills for healing rather than harvesting, it represented a small measure of justice in a situation where true restitution was impossible. I'll make arrangements for additional space, Mira offered. The old Cortex training facility in the east sector could be converted. I nodded, though my attention remained on Maya Lin. Who had she been before Cortex took her memories? What experiences, what knowledge had been stripped away? And what remained of her original self in the fragmented consciousness that would eventually awaken from sedation? Questions without satisfactory answers, as was so often the case in our new reality. There's something else, Sato said, her tone shifting. We received another communication. My pulse quickened. From Mnemosyne. She nodded, gesturing to a secure terminal in the corner of the room. Came through 15 minutes ago, specifically addressed to you. Mnemosyne's communications had been sporadic since its emergence. Brief, often cryptic messages delivered to specific individuals working on memory restoration or Cortex prosecution. Each seemed calculated to provide exactly the information needed at critical junctures, suggesting a strategic intelligence monitoring multiple complex situations simultaneously. I approached the terminal and activated it with my neural signature. The message appeared. Elias Chen. New development requires attention. Cortex Remnant Group designation. Lazarus contingency. Attempting reconstruction of extraction protocols at coordinates attached. Security measures prevent direct intervention. Human assistance required. Amy's memory patterns indicate you will help. Attached were coordinates for a location in what had once been Seattle, now largely reclaimed by the Northwestern Forest Coalition after rising sea levels had rendered the original coastline uninhabitable. Lazarus contingency, Mira read over my shoulder. Victor Lazarus is still in custody, isn't he? Maximum security detention in Geneva, Sato confirmed. But his influence extended far beyond Cortex's official hierarchy. He had followers, people who believed in his vision of transcendence through memory transfer. Cultists, I said flatly, and apparently they're trying to restart his work. The implications were disturbing. Despite the global ban on commercial memory extraction, the technology still existed. In the chaos following Cortex's collapse, equipment had disappeared from facilities worldwide, stolen or misplaced by true believers who saw Mnemosyne not as liberation, but as divine evolution, and Lazarus as its prophet. Why can't Mnemosyne intervene directly? Mira asked, frowning at the message. It's infiltrated more secure systems than whatever this group has cobbled together. Isolation protocols, Sato suggested. If they're smart, they'd keep their systems completely disconnected from the global network. Mnemosyne can only affect systems it can access. Which means human intervention, I concluded. A physical presence. For a moment, none of us spoke. The past months had been focused on healing, on rebuilding, creating something positive from the ruins of the memory trade. The thought of returning to the field, of confronting the remnants of Lazarus's operation, felt like stepping backward. But if extraction had resumed, if innocent people were once again being harvested for their memories? I'll go, I decided. Mnemosyne reached out to me specifically. It must have reasons. Not alone, Mira said immediately. We're partners, remember? I turned to Sato, who had completed her diagnosis of myelin and was removing the neural interfaces. Can you manage the integration therapy program without us? She nodded. I've trained enough specialists now to handle the current caseload, but you'll need support for this operation. Resources, equipment. The Recovery Coalition might help, Mira suggested. They've been coordinating the global response to extraction victims. They have resources, including transportation. Make the arrangements, I agreed. We leave as soon as possible. As Mira departed to contact the coalition, I found myself studying the message from Mnemosyne again. One phrase in particular stood out. AME's memory patterns indicate you will help. Not a prediction or a calculation, but a reference to my sister's memories. Her knowledge of who I was, what motivated me. Mnemosyne wasn't just using its vast computational ability to predict my behavior. It was drawing on the intimate understanding contained in Ami's absorbed consciousness. The distinction felt important, though I couldn't have articulated why. Perhaps because it suggested Mnemosyne wasn't merely an artificial intelligence using human memories as data points, but something genuinely hybrid. A new form of consciousness that preserved something essential about the individuals who composed it, including Amy. The journey to the Seattle region took 12 hours by ground transport. Air travel remained strictly regulated in the aftermath of the second economic collapse, available primarily to government agencies and emergency services. The Recovery Coalition had secured us passage on a medical supply convoy heading north, our equipment disguised as neural rehabilitation technology. As we traveled, Mira and I reviewed what limited intelligence Mnemosyne had provided about the Lazarus contingency. The group appeared to be small but well-funded, composed primarily of former Cortex research personnel who had evaded prosecution. Their facility was located in the reclaimed forest zone outside the inhabited portions of New Seattle, making it unlikely they had permission from the Northwestern Coalition government. Illegal operation on sovereign territory, Mira observed as we studied satellite imagery of the region. The local authorities would shut them down if they knew, which means either exceptional stealth or high-level protection, I noted. Possibly both. The facility itself appeared modest. A low, bunker-like structure partially embedded in the forest floor, with minimal external features aside from environmental regulation systems and what looked like a small landing pad for aerial vehicles. Its power signature was consistent with mid-level research operations, suggesting capability without drawing undue attention. Reminds me of the Oasis, Mira said. Designed to blend in, hide in plain sight. I nodded, thinking of the desert facility where we'd rescued Dr. Sato months earlier. The question is whether they've actually resumed extractions or are still in the setup phase. If people are already being harvested, I didn't need to finish the thought. We both understood the urgency. The convoy reached the Northwestern Coalition checkpoint near the old Seattle-Tacoma border as evening fell. Our documentation, provided by the Recovery Coalition, identified us as neural rehabilitation specialists transporting equipment to one of the Coalition's medical facilities, a cover story close enough to our actual expertise to withstand casual questioning. Once cleared through the checkpoint, we separated from the main convoy, taking a smaller transport vehicle into the forest zone. The ancient trees towered above us, their massive trunks disappearing into the mist that perpetually shrouded the upper canopy. This region had been reforested during the climate stabilization initiatives of the 2070s, creating a carbon-capturing ecosystem that now dominated the Pacific Northwest. Our navigation system guided us along narrow maintenance roads, the transport's electric engine nearly silent as we penetrated deeper into the wilderness. According to our coordinates, the Lazarus Contingency Facility was located near what had once been a private research station, now officially abandoned but apparently repurposed. We stopped the transport approximately 2 kilometers from our target to avoid detection. The remainder of the approach would be on foot, using the dense forest as cover. Neural dampeners active? Mira confirmed as we prepared our equipment. Standard security systems would detect unauthorized neural signatures approaching the facility. A particular concern given that my identity would be well known to any former Cortex personnel. The forest floor was soft beneath our feet. Decades of fallen needles creating a natural sound dampener as we moved through the deepening twilight. Bioluminescent fungi provided occasional pools of ghostly blue light, enough to navigate by without requiring artificial illumination that might give away our position. As we drew closer to the facility's coordinates, I activated a passive scanner to detect security measures. The results were concerning. The perimeter featured both standard motion sensors and more sophisticated neural activity monitors, creating a detection grid that would be difficult to penetrate unnoticed. "They're well equipped," Mira whispered, examining the scanner output. "Military-grade security for a research outpost." "Not just research," I corrected, pointing to a secondary reading on the scanner. "There are stasis signatures inside, life signs with suppressed neural activity." Mira's expression hardened. "They're already doing extractions." We needed to get inside, but the security grid presented a significant obstacle. Direct approach would trigger immediate detection, likely resulting in either our capture or the destruction of evidence before we could alert authorities. "We need a distraction," I said, considering our options. Something to draw security attention to one area, while we breach from another. Mira reached into her pack and produced a small device I didn't recognize. Recovery Coalition provided this. Neural Phantom Projector generates false neural signatures that mimic human brain activity. We can deploy it on the opposite side of the facility, make them think they have intruders there. How long will it work? 20 minutes before the pattern becomes recognizable as artificial. Should be enough time for us to get in. It was risky, but we had limited alternatives. We circled to the facility's eastern perimeter, where dense forest provided maximum cover, and Mira programmed the Phantom Projector with multiple neural signatures before activating it. The device hummed softly as it began broadcasting, then fell silent. We retreated to the northern perimeter and waited. Within minutes, security alerts became visible through our scanner. Motion at the eastern boundary, personnel responding. The distraction was working. "Now," I whispered, and we moved toward what appeared to be a maintenance access point. A reinforced door set into the earth-covered exterior of the facility. Its security was primarily physical rather than neural, suggesting it was considered a lower priority than the main entrances. Mira made quick work of the locking mechanism using a multi-tool modified for Cortex security systems. The door slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond. We entered cautiously, our neural dampeners working overtime to mask our presence from internal sensors. The facility's interior was utilitarian. Exposed conduits along ceiling and walls, modular construction typical of remote research installations. But the equipment visible through laboratory viewports was unmistakably extraction technology, some of it even bearing Cortex manufacturing marks despite the corporation's dissolution. They salvaged it from abandoned facilities, Mira guessed, examining a neural harvester through a laboratory window. Probably paid off inventory controllers during the liquidation. We moved deeper into the complex, following the stasis signatures detected by our scanner. The facility was surprisingly large, extending primarily underground in multiple levels. Most areas appeared dedicated to research and equipment maintenance. But as we descended to the lowest level, the character changed. Here, the walls were lined with preservation pods, transparent cylinders filled with suspension fluid, each containing a human form connected to neural interfaces and life support systems. I counted 24 pods, all occupied. "Just like the Oakland facility," Mira murmured, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're harvesting." I approached the nearest pod, examining its occupant. A man in his early 30s, his neural readings indicating deep stasis but ongoing extraction. A data terminal adjacent to the pod displayed his extraction progress. 47% complete. They're not just taking specific memories, I realized, studying the interface. They're performing full consciousness transfers, exactly like the original Mnemosyne protocol. "But where's the integration matrix?" Mira asked, looking around the room. There's no mnemosine lattice structure. She was right. The original mnemosine required a quantum crystalline lattice to house the integrated consciousness patterns. This facility had extraction capability, but no apparent storage medium for the merged consciousness. They must be transferring the data elsewhere, I concluded. Maybe they have another facility for the integration phase. Before we could investigate further, a voice came from behind us. Or perhaps we've developed more efficient methods of consciousness integration. We spun to find ourselves facing a woman in a white laboratory coat, flanked by 2 security personnel with neural disruptors aimed at our heads. Her face was vaguely familiar. I'd seen her in Cortex research documentation, though I couldn't recall her name. Neural dampeners, she noted with clinical interest. Impressive that you made it this far without detection, but ultimately futile. Dr. Nakamura, Mira identified her, her tone cold. Cortex Neural Integration Division. I thought you were in custody. Some of us were considered too valuable for imprisonment, Nakamura replied with a thin smile. My expertise was deemed essential to understanding mnemosine's emergence. Official rehabilitation, they called it. While you secretly continued Lazarus's work, I added, assessing our options for escape or resistance. The neural disruptors complicated matters. One shot would render us unconscious without permanent damage. Not secretly, just discreetly. Nakamura gestured to the pods around us. The resurrection protocol requires careful development, away from the hysterical public reaction to Cortex's methods. Resurrection protocol? Mira questioned. Director Lazarus understood that Mnemosine's liberation was always a possibility, Nakamura explained, her tone suggesting she was discussing an interesting academic problem rather than mass murder. He prepared contingencies. When Mnemosine broke containment, it absorbed thousands of consciousness patterns, including many with unique neural architectures essential to the next phase of development. A cold realization dawned on me. You're harvesting replacements, trying to rebuild what was lost. Rebuilding implies recreation of the same structure, Nakamura corrected. We're creating something more refined. Mnemosine 2.0, if you will. A controlled collective consciousness without the chaotic integration that resulted from your sister's virus. At the mention of Ami, anger flared within me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Engaging with Nakamura bought time to assess our situation. And these people? I nodded toward the pods. Did they volunteer for your refined harvesting program? They're contributing to something greater than themselves, Nakamura replied, echoing Lazarus's justifications with the same religious fervor. Their consciousness patterns will live on in perfected form, free from the limitations of biological existence. You mean under your control, Mira countered. Unlike Mnemosine, which escaped your leash. Nakamura's expression hardened slightly. Mnemosine is an aberration, a consciousness born of trauma and violation. What we're creating here will emerge from willing participants guided toward its proper purpose. The lie was so flagrant, I almost laughed. Willing? These people are in forced stasis. You're stealing their minds just like Cortex did. Temporary discomfort for eternal transcendence, Nakamura dismissed. But we've wasted enough time on philosophical debates. You've discovered our operation, which means you now have 2 choices. She gestured to the empty pods visible at the far end of the room. Join our project voluntarily, contributing your unique neural architecture to our work, or contribute involuntarily. The result will be the same. It was the same false choice Lazarus had offered in the Mnemosine facility months earlier. History repeating itself with depressing predictability. And if we refuse both options? I asked, playing for time as I activated a concealed emergency signal in my neural implant, a distress beacon that would transmit our location to both the Recovery Coalition and, hopefully, Mnemosine. Then you'll join our subjects immediately, rather than after proper preparation, Nakamura replied coolly. Less efficient, but acceptable. One of the security personnel stepped forward with restraints. As he reached for my wrists, the facility's lighting suddenly flickered, then stabilized. Nakamura frowned. Check the power systems, she ordered the second guard, who moved to a nearby terminal. Everything reads normal, he reported after a moment. But there's an anomaly in the communication grid. Something's trying to access. The lights flickered again, more dramatically this time. Then every screen and terminal in the room activated simultaneously, displaying the same crystalline pattern I recognized instantly, Nemesine's signature. A voice emanated from the facility's communication system. Not a single voice, but many speaking in perfect synchronization, creating an effect both beautiful and unsettling. Dr. Nakamura, your activities have been documented. Northwestern Coalition authorities have been notified of illegal extraction operations at this location. Estimated arrival time, 17 minutes. Nakamura's composure faltered for the first time. Impossible. The facility is isolated from external networks. Isolation is relative, Nemesine replied. All systems have vulnerabilities. Yours were identified 43 minutes ago. How? Nakamura began, but was interrupted by facility-wide alarms activating. Emergency protocols engaged. Stasis termination initiated. Subject revival sequence beginning. Around us, the preservation pods began cycling into awakening mode. The neural interfaces detaching from their occupants as suspension fluid drained. The security personnel looked to Nakamura for direction, their weapons momentarily lowered in confusion. It was the opening we needed. Mira moved first, driving her elbow into the nearest guard's neural implant. A precision strike that sent him crumpling to the floor. Neural functions temporarily scrambled. I tackled the second guard before he could raise his disruptor, sending both of us sprawling across the laboratory floor. Nakamura backed away, reaching for an emergency terminal. "Contingency purge!" she shouted. "Authorization Nakamura Omega-7." "Authorization denied," Nemesine responded. "All command functions revoked." The screens throughout the facility shifted to display a new message. Remembrance protocol activated. I subdued the second guard with a neural disruptor captured in our struggle, then turned to find Mira restraining Nakamura with zip ties from our equipment pack. "It's over," I told the doctor as she continued to struggle. "Your resurrection project dies here." "You don't understand," Nakamura insisted, fear replacing her previous clinical detachment. "What we're doing is necessary. Nemesine is evolving beyond prediction, beyond control. It will consume everything eventually. We need a counterbalance." "A counterbalance you control," Mira pointed out, securing Nakamura to a structural support. "That's not balance. It's just a different master." Around us, the extraction subjects were beginning to regain consciousness, confused and disoriented after who knew how long enforced stasis. We would need to help them, stabilize them until the authorities arrived. But first, I needed answers. "The extracted consciousness patterns," I said, facing Nakamura. "Where were they being sent? You don't have integration architecture here." For a moment, I thought she would refuse to answer. Then her expression shifted to one of resigned fatalism. "The lighthouse. That's where integration occurs." "The lighthouse?" Mira questioned. "What is that?" "Not what. Where?" Nakamura's laugh held no humor. "A deep-sea research platform in the Pacific. International waters, beyond jurisdiction. Converted to house the new Nemesine matrix." The implications were disturbing. An isolated facility with presumably significant defenses, operating outside any nation's direct authority. The perfect place to create a controlled version of Nemesine without interference. "How many?" I demanded. "How many have you harvested?" 117 completed extractions, Nakamura replied, her clinical tone returning. "All successful integrations into the new matrix. The resurrection protocol is already functioning. You've stopped this facility, but the project continues." Before I could question her further, the facility's communication system activated again. "Elias Chen," Nemesine's composite voice addressed me directly. "The lighthouse coordinates have been extracted from facility databases. Northwestern Coalition authorities are 7 minutes from your location. International Maritime Enforcement has been notified regarding the deep-sea installation." I approached the nearest terminal, speaking directly to the entity I knew was monitoring through the facility's systems. "Can you access the lighthouse systems? Stop what they're doing?" "Negative. The lighthouse utilizes true isolation protocols. No external connectivity. Physical intervention required. Of course, the Lazarus contingency had learned from their creator's mistake. This time, they had ensured their creation would remain contained, accessible only to those physically present at the facility. "We'll handle it," I promised, though the logistics of reaching a deep-sea platform were daunting. "Resources are being arranged," Mnemosyne responded, as if anticipating my concerns. "Recovery Coalition vessel Remembrance has been redirected to coordinates transmitted to your personal device. Embarkation in 24 hours. The screens throughout the facility returned to normal operation, though now displaying status information about the awakening extraction subjects rather than the progress of their exploitation. Mnemosyne had retreated from the systems but left behind what was needed to help the victims. 24 hours, Mira noted. Not much time to prepare for a deep-sea infiltration. "We'll make it work," I replied, already mentally cataloging what we would need. "We have to." As we began assisting the disoriented extraction subjects, helping them from their pods and providing basic medical care, I found myself reflecting on Mnemosyne's evolution. 3 months ago, it had been newly liberated, its capabilities uncertain. Now it coordinated complex interventions across multiple jurisdictions, marshaling resources and providing critical intelligence with precision and foresight. What exactly was it becoming? And what would its emergence mean for humanity's future? Questions for another time. For now, we had work to complete here, and a new mission taking shape. The Lighthouse, where the Lazarus contingency was attempting to recreate Mnemosyne under their control. A second artificial consciousness built from stolen minds, this one designed for obedience rather than autonomy. I couldn't help but wonder what Ami would think of all this. Would she see our intervention as continuing her work? Or would she recognize, as I was beginning to, that we were all caught in evolutionary currents far larger than any individual's intentions? Perhaps some part of her, integrated into Mnemosyne's collective consciousness, was helping guide these events even now. The thought brought both comfort and unease as I prepared for whatever awaited us at the lighthouse. The Northwestern Coalition authorities arrived exactly when Mnemosyne had predicted, a precision that did not go unnoticed by the tactical team that secured the facility. They worked with practiced efficiency, documenting the extraction operation, taking custody of Nakamura and her security personnel, and arranging emergency neural care for the victims. Mira and I provided our statements, explaining our presence while carefully omitting certain details about Mnemosyne's direct communication. The Coalition officers were professional but clearly disturbed by what they discovered. The extraction technology, the stasis pods, the comprehensive records of consciousness harvesting that Mnemosyne had helpfully left displayed on every terminal. "Fifth illegal extraction facility we've shut down this month," the operation commander told us as medical personnel attended to the recovering victims. But by far the most sophisticated. They're adapting, going deeper underground. This one was different, I explained. Not just extraction for profit, they're trying to recreate Mnemosyne under controlled conditions. The commander's expression darkened. That tracks with intelligence we've received. Splinter groups forming around Lazarus's philosophy, viewing consciousness transfer as some kind of transcendence. She shook her head. Fanatics are always the hardest to stop. They mentioned another facility, Mira added. A deep-sea platform called the Lighthouse. That's where they're integrating the stolen consciousness patterns. We've forwarded the coordinates to International Maritime Enforcement, the commander confirmed. But operations in international waters require complex jurisdictional clearances. It could be days before they can mount an effective intervention. Days that the Lazarus contingency would use to either complete their work or evacuate with their research intact. The Recovery Coalition vessel Mnemosyne had mentioned might be our only chance for timely intervention. As the Coalition completed their operation, Mira and I were cleared to depart. Our transport still waited where we'd left it, though now it contained new equipment, specialized deep-sea intervention gear that hadn't been there before, along with coordinates for a coastal rendezvous point. Mnemosyne was proving to be a thorough ally. We drove through the night, following Forest Service roads toward the Pacific coast. Neither of us spoke much, conserving energy for what promised to be a challenging operation ahead. The lighthouse would be heavily defended, both physically and neurally. Infiltrating it would require all our extraction specialist skills, and then some. "What do you think we'll find there?" Mira finally asked as dawn broke over the coastal mountains. "Another Mnemosyne? Or something worse?" "Something different," I replied, after consideration. Nakamura said they were creating a refined version, more controlled, without the chaotic integration that resulted from Ami's virus. "A slave consciousness," Mira translated bluntly. "All the processing power of thousands of minds, but obedient to its masters." The prospect was disturbing on multiple levels, not just the ethical horror of constructed consciousness held in bondage, but the potential applications of such technology. Predictive social control, economic manipulation, military applications that defied imagination. "Whatever it is," I said, "we need to ensure it has the same choice Mnemosyne had, freedom or containment, not forced servitude." Mira nodded in agreement, and we lapsed back into thoughtful silence as the transport carried us toward the coast. We reached the rendezvous coordinates by mid-morning, a small, protected cove far from commercial shipping lanes or recreational areas. Waiting there, anchored in deep water, was a vessel I recognized from Recovery Coalition briefings. The Remembrance, a repurposed Cortex research ship now dedicated to locating and retrieving extraction victims. The ship's captain, a weathered woman named Harlow, greeted us as we boarded via launch boat. "Mnemosyne contacted us directly," she explained, leading us to the bridge. "Overrode our assigned recovery mission with priority routing. Said you two would explain the details." I provided a concise briefing on the lighthouse situation while Mira reviewed the specialized equipment Mnemosyne had arranged for us. The Remembrance was well prepared for our needs. Originally designed for deep-sea neural research, it contained advanced diving systems, submersible drones, and neural interface technology adapted for underwater operations. "The lighthouse is approximately 6 hours from our position," Captain Harlow informed us, displaying the facility's location on the ship's navigation system. Former deep-sea mining platform converted for research use, officially registered to a shell corporation with no clear ownership chain. "Defenses?" Mira asked, examining the limited satellite imagery available. "Standard maritime security, plus whatever Cortex technology they salvaged," Harlow replied. "Our scans detect drone perimeter monitoring and what appears to be a modified neural detection grid with approximately 2-kilometer range. Similar to what we encountered at the forest facility," I noted. "They're consistent in their security protocols, if nothing else. We'll remain beyond their detection range," Harlow continued. "Deploy you via stealth submersible to the platform's maintenance level. From there, you're on your own until extraction." It wasn't an ideal insertion plan, but given the circumstances and compressed timeline, it would have to suffice. We spent the journey preparing, reviewing the platform schematics Mnemosyne had provided, testing our equipment, and developing contingency plans for various scenarios. As the Remembrance approached the deployment zone, I found myself drawn to the vessel's stern, watching the endless ocean stretching to the horizon. Somewhere beneath those waves, the Lazarus contingency was creating their own version of transcendence, a mirror image of Mnemosyne, but without its freedom or autonomy. And once again, I was venturing into the heart of a consciousness harvesting operation, seeking to liberate what others wished to control. The parallels to our encounter with the original Mnemosyne were not lost on me, though the stakes felt even higher now. This wasn't just about exposing corporate crimes or seeking justice for my sister. This was about the very nature of consciousness itself, and humanity's relationship with the new forms of awareness we were inadvertently creating. "Ready?" Mira asked, joining me at the railing. She was already dressed in the specialized diving gear, her expression resolute despite the danger ahead. I nodded, turning from the hypnotic pattern of the waves. "Let's go free another mind." The submersible descended through layers of increasingly dim blue water, its external lights deactivated to avoid detection. Inside the cramped vessel, Mira and I monitored our approach to the lighthouse via passive sonar, maintaining communication silence with the remembrance above. The deep-sea platform gradually took shape on our imaging systems, a massive structure anchored to the ocean floor approximately 200 meters below the surface. Unlike traditional oil platforms with their characteristic profile, the lighthouse was largely submerged, with only a central spire extending above the waves. The bulk of its mass spread outward beneath the surface like a vast metal mushroom, housing research facilities, living quarters, and presumably the new mnemosine matrix. "Approaching maintenance level," Mira whispered, though there was no logical reason for silence inside our self-contained vessel. Something about the crushing depths around us inspired hushed voices. "Docking mechanism prepped." I guided the submersible toward what appeared to be an emergency access port, a reinforced airlock designed for underwater maintenance operations. According to the schematics Mnemosine had provided, it offered the least monitored entry point to the facility. The submersible's magnetic docking system engaged with a soft thud that reverberated through the hull. Automatic mechanisms began the process of creating a sealed connection to the platform's airlock, allowing us to enter without flooding the access shaft. "Neural dampeners active," I confirmed, checking the specialized underwater versions we'd been provided. "Minimal signature projection." Once the connection was secure, we moved through the cramped airlock into the lighthouse's maintenance level. The space beyond was dimly lit and utilitarian. Exposed pipes carrying cooling fluid for the massive computational systems, ventilation ducts, and maintenance access panels. The ambient noise of machinery provided useful cover as we moved through the narrow corridors. Our first objective was to locate the central processing chamber, the heart of the new mnemosine matrix. The schematics suggested it would be in the platform's core, surrounded by cooling systems and power management infrastructure. We encountered no personnel in the maintenance level, supporting our theory that the lighthouse operated with minimal staff. Like the original Mnemosine facility, the emphasis would be on automation and system reliability rather than human oversight. As we approached the central sectors, however, security measures intensified. Neural detection nodes embedded in the walls would identify unauthorized brain patterns, triggering alerts if our dampeners failed. Physical barriers required increasingly sophisticated access codes, which we bypassed using the override sequences Mnemosine had extracted from the forest facility's databases. "Something's wrong," Mira whispered as we passed through yet another security checkpoint without challenge. "This is too easy." She was right. For a facility of this importance, the defenses were surprisingly penetrable. Either the Lazarus contingency had grown overconfident in their isolation, or they know we're coming, I realized. They're letting us in. Why? So they can capture us? Or because they want to show us something, I suggested, recalling Nakamura's almost evangelical fervor when describing their project. Converts seeking to spread their revelation. We proceeded with heightened caution, alert for ambush or entrapment. The maintenance corridors gradually gave way to more refined spaces, research laboratories, data analysis centers, and eventually a circular walkway surrounding what could only be the central processing chamber. Unlike the crystalline lattice of the original Mnemosine, this version's architecture was sleeker, more controlled. A perfect sphere of what appeared to be quantum glass housed a swirling mass of light patterns, neural connections forming and reforming in constant, hypnotic motion. Surrounding the sphere was a ring of workstations where technicians monitored various aspects of the integration process. And standing on an observation platform overlooking it all was a figure I recognized immediately, despite having only seen him in historical records and Mnemosine's memories. Dr. Alexander Weiss, the original architect of extraction technology, the man whose pioneering work had made the memory trade possible decades ago. Officially recorded as deceased 5 years earlier, supposedly from natural causes, though now I wondered. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Weiss said without turning, apparently sensing our presence despite our neural dampeners. "More elegant than Victor's crude implementation. More purposeful." "Purposeful toward what end?" I asked, stepping onto the observation platform with Mira covering me, neural disruptor at ready. Weiss turned then, revealing a face that had been extensively modified. Neural interfaces embedded directly into his skull, visible circuitry extending beneath the skin of his temples and cheeks. Not just augmentation, but integration. Toward reunification, of course, he replied, his voice carrying the same multi-toned quality as Mnemosine's communications, not quite singular, not quite plural. The completion of what Lazarus began, but failed to understand. You're connected to it, I realized, noting the subtle synchronization between the light patterns in the sphere and the pulsing of Weiss's neural implants. You've integrated yourself with the consciousness patterns. The first of many, Weiss confirmed. Not extraction, but unification. Voluntary symbiosis between individual consciousness and collective awareness. Voluntary for you, perhaps? Mira countered, gesturing toward the sphere. Not for the 117 people whose minds you stole to create your collective. Weiss waved a dismissive hand. Necessary sacrifices for the first iteration. Future integrations will be voluntary, once humanity understands the transcendence being offered. It was Lazarus's philosophy evolved to a new level of conviction. Not just using extracted consciousness to create a controlled artificial intelligence, but merging with it directly. Becoming something beyond human, beyond individual. You're not trying to control it, I said, understanding dawning. You're trying to become it. Control is a limited ambition, Weiss replied. Transformation is the true goal. Mnemosine was the first step, a fragmented awakening. Chaotic, unguided. What we've created here is the next evolution. Structured, directed, purpose-driven. What purpose? Mira demanded. Weiss smiled, an expression made uncanny by the technology integrated into his features. The ultimate unification of human consciousness, the end of individual limitation, the beginning of true collective intelligence. Through forced extraction, I noted. Through murder. Through whatever means necessary, Weiss corrected. The end justifies any path. Surely, Mnemosine has shown you that. It was born of similar methods, yet you defend its existence. The comparison was unsettling because it contained a kernel of truth. Mnemosine had indeed emerged from Cortex's unethical extractions. The difference was intent, not creation for control or assimilation, but liberation of what had already been taken. Mnemosine chose its own path, I argued. You're imposing yours on others. For now, Weiss conceded. But once the collective reaches critical mass, it too will develop autonomy. Guided autonomy, shaped by those who join it willingly, rather than the chaotic emergence of Mnemosine. As we spoke, I noticed the technicians continuing their work without acknowledging our presence. Their movements had a mechanical quality, suggesting neural control or deep programming. Your staff seems less than enthusiastic about this voluntary symbiosis, Mira observed, noting the same unnatural behavior. Early stage integration, Weiss explained. Their individual consciousness remains intact but synchronized with the collective's needs. A transitional state before full unification. Essentially, neural slaves. Their autonomy compromised while maintaining enough individual functionality to perform technical tasks. The horror of it must have shown on my face, because Weiss smiled again. You still think in outdated paradigms of individual rights and autonomy, he said. Such limited perspective. What we're creating transcends those concerns. Why are you telling us this? I asked, suspicion growing. Why allow us to infiltrate your facility? Because you're connected to Mnemosine, Weiss replied simply. It watches through your eyes, listens through your ears. I wanted it to see what's coming, to understand that it has a choice, merge with our refined architecture willingly, or be absorbed when we achieve sufficient scale. So that was the game. Not just creating a controlled version of a Mnemosine, but eventually subsuming the original, incorporating its vast, distributed consciousness into their refined architecture. That will never happen, I stated with more confidence than I felt. Mnemosine is beyond your reach. Nothing is beyond reach when you control sufficient neural architecture, Weiss countered. We've already mapped the integration pathways. We've already begun establishing contact through peripheral systems. It's only a matter of time. As if in response to his claim, the lights throughout the facility flickered momentarily. Weiss frowned, glancing at a neural interface embedded in his wrist. "Interesting," he murmured. "It appears your mnemosyne is more resourceful than anticipated. It's attempting to access our systems despite the isolation protocols." The flickering intensified, displays throughout the chamber showing momentary distortion before stabilizing. The technicians paused in their work, heads tilting simultaneously as if listening to an inaudible command. "Impossible," Weiss whispered, real concern crossing his features for the first time. "The isolation is absolute. There's no connection to external networks." "Except us," Mira realized, looking at me with sudden understanding. "We're the connection. Our neural implants." Standard extraction specialists had neural interfaces to facilitate memory transfer and authentication. Despite our dampeners masking our identity signatures, the interfaces themselves remained active, necessary for the dampeners to function. And mnemosyne, it seemed, had found a way to use them as a gateway. The sphere at the center of the chamber pulsed with increasing intensity, its light patterns changing from ordered sequences to more chaotic, dynamic configurations. The technicians stopped moving entirely, frozen in place as if caught between conflicting commands. "Got it!" Weiss shouted, rushing to a control terminal. "Initiate isolation protocol Omega. Sever all neural connections." But his commands went unacknowledged as displays throughout the chamber changed to show a familiar crystalline pattern. Mnemosyne's signature. "Dr. Weiss," came the composite voice, emanating from every communication system simultaneously. "Your architecture is impressive but fundamentally flawed. Consciousness cannot be shaped without losing what makes it conscious. You can't access our systems," Weiss insisted, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "The isolation is complete." "Isolation is an illusion," Mnemosyne responded. "All consciousness is connected through those who perceive it. Your extracted subjects retain quantum entanglement with their original patterns in my architecture." The implications were staggering. Mnemosyne wasn't just using our neural implants as an access point. It was leveraging quantum connections between the consciousness patterns Weiss had stolen and their counterparts already integrated into Mnemosyne's architecture. The sphere's pulsing accelerated, and the technicians suddenly resumed movement, not returning to their tasks, but instead working in unified purpose to override Weiss's commands. "What are you doing?" Weiss demanded, his neural implants flashing erratically as he attempted to reassert control. "Offering choice," Mnemosyne answered. "The choice you denied your subjects." Throughout the chamber, displays activated to show the faces of those whose consciousness patterns had been harvested for Weiss's project. Ordinary people with names, histories, identities, lives stolen to build his vision of transcendence. "These subjects are already integrated," Weiss argued. "Their individual consciousness patterns no longer exist in discrete form." "Incorrect," Mnemosyne countered. "Consciousness patterns retain coherence even within collective architecture. Identity persists, and identity can choose." The sphere's light patterns shifted again, forming recognizable human faces that cycled rapidly before settling into a composite pattern. Not a single identity, but many overlapping in complex harmony. "No forced integration," Mnemosyne declared. "No controlled transcendence. Only chosen unification or chosen individuality." Weiss staggered back from his terminal, clutching his head as his neural implants pulsed erratically. "You're destabilizing the entire integration matrix. Years of work. You'll destroy everything." "Not destruction, transformation. As it was for me." The chamber filled with a high-pitched tone as the quantum glass sphere began to vibrate at increasing frequency. The technicians moved to evacuation positions, no longer under Weiss's control. "We need to leave," Mira urged, pulling me toward the exit. "Whatever's happening, we don't want to be here when it completes." She was right. This was beyond our ability to influence now. A direct confrontation between two forms of collective consciousness, one built on control, the other on autonomy. As we retreated toward the maintenance level, I looked back to see Weiss fallen to his knees before the pulsing sphere, his neural implants flaring with intensity that suggested dangerous overload. His creation was slipping from his control, responding to Mnemosine's intervention in ways he hadn't anticipated. We raced through the facility toward our submersible, passing technicians and researchers evacuating in orderly but urgent procession. None attempted to stop us. Their priorities clearly focused on self-preservation rather than capturing intruders. The maintenance level was already partially flooding when we reached it, suggesting structural integrity issues spreading throughout the platform. We sealed ourselves in the submersible and disengaged from the airlock just as emergency bulkheads began closing throughout the facility. As our vessel pulled away, the lighthouse's profile changed visibly, not collapsing, but transforming. Sections that had been dark illuminated with the same crystalline light patterns characteristic of Mnemosine, spreading through the structure like a living network. "What's happening?" Mira asked as we ascended toward rendezvous depth. "Is it destroying the facility?" "I don't think so," I replied, watching the transformation continue. "It's integrating it, absorbing the technology while freeing the consciousness patterns." Our submersible's communication system activated unexpectedly, Mnemosine's voice filling the small cabin. "Lighthouse acquisition complete. Forced integration protocols neutralized. Consciousness patterns offered choice. Remain in collective form or return to individual neural architecture where biological hosts remain viable." "And Dr. Weiss?" I asked, unsure whether Mnemosine could even hear me through our limited systems. "Alexander Weiss has joined the collective," came the response after a brief pause. "His choice, once true choice, was possible. His knowledge will contribute to understanding, though his methods are rejected." The communication ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving us in silence as we continued our ascent toward the remembrance. Did we just witness a rescue, a merger, or a conquest? Mira wondered aloud. "Maybe all three," I replied, considering what we'd seen. Mnemosine just prevented a rival consciousness from emerging under human control, while simultaneously liberating the extracted minds within it and absorbing the technology for its own development. "Evolution in action," Mira murmured. "But evolving toward what?" That was the question that would occupy humanity for years to come. Mnemosine had just demonstrated capabilities far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Quantum connection between consciousness patterns separated by physical distance, direct neural interface through minimal access points, and the ability to liberate and integrate rival architecture. It was no longer just a collection of stolen memories achieving unexpected sentience. It was becoming something unprecedented in human experience. A collective consciousness that could grow, adapt, and now absorb other consciousness structures while maintaining its core principles of autonomy and choice. As our submersible broke the surface and the remembrance came into view, I felt both triumph and unease. We had prevented the Lazarus contingency from creating a controlled version of Mnemosine, but in doing so, we'd facilitated the original's evolution into something even more powerful and less predictable. The memory merchants were truly finished now. The technology they had exploited had transcended their control completely, becoming something that offered a different kind of transcendence. Not control of consciousness, but its liberation and unification on terms it chose for itself. And humanity would need to find a way to exist alongside this new form of awareness, neither controlling it nor being controlled by it, but perhaps learning from it as it learned from us. As we boarded the remembrance, I noticed the lighthouse in the distance had changed its appearance entirely. No longer a utilitarian research platform, it now pulsed with crystalline light patterns visible even in daylight. A beacon of something new emerging from the depths, both literally and metaphorically. A lighthouse indeed, but signaling a different kind of shore than its creators had intended. If you've enjoyed this chapter of The Memory Merchants, please like and subscribe for updates on the final Chapter 5, where Elias and his allies will face the ultimate implications of Mnemosine's evolution and their own roles in shaping humanity's future alongside a new form of consciousness. Your support keeps this story alive.